Welcome to New Hampshire Healthy Climates webinar this evening. Please keep your microphone on mute. Being mute should be evident to you by the reddish slash mark running through the audio icon at the bottom left of your screen. Tonight's webinar will be recorded and posted on the New Hampshire Healthy Climate website and sent to everyone who registered. If you have questions for the author or New Hampshire Healthy Climate, please post them in the chat. And if there's time, Emily will monitor them and ask a few after the interview tonight. This webinar takes place on Indakina, which translates to our homelands and is currently called New Hampshire and Vermont. Indakina is the unceded traditional ancestral homelands and waterways of the Pennacook, Abenaki, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land, water, air, flora, and fauna, and the beings who have stewarded Indokina throughout the generations for over 12,000 years. My name is Beverly Petlicki, and I will be interviewing Chelsea Steinauer-Scudder, author of Mother Creature Kin, What We Learn from Nature's Mothers in a Time of Unraveling this evening. The questions I am asking come from a number of different sources, including book discussion guides found online and members of our own Bookworm book discussion group. Welcome, Chelsea, to New Hampshire Healthy Climate's first ever author interview. Thank you for writing this book and taking the time to be with us this evening. My experience reading your book is that, see if I can, your book was one full of anticipation and wonder. And I found myself I found your writing to be engaging and poetic, each section to be read slowly and savored, so as to come as close as possible to feel and understand your interpretations of how the theme of mothering could be revealed in these various circumstances. I came away inspired by the revelations that you shared. I would like to read a little intro from the flap of your book, if that's okay. Yeah. Miss Steinauer-Scudder has a Master's of Theology Studies from Harvard Divinity School and has worked as a staff writer for Emergence Magazine, a publication exploring the intersection of ecology, culture, and spirituality. Her work has been featured in various other publications as well, including Katie Holton's The Language of Trees. Is there anything that you'd like to add so the audience can get a sense of who you are and how your background led you to take on the multitude of scientific investigations that encompass the overall theme of your book?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And thank you, Beverly and Emily, for having me. I've been so looking forward to this conversation, and thank you all for being here. And yes, I'm glad to add a little more background. I think so. I grew up with a plant ecologist for a father who spent his career in first prairie research in Nebraska and Oklahoma and Kansas, and then working for the Massachusetts Audubon Society. And so I had sort of a very kind of my environmental understanding growing up was a very scientific one. We grew up helping my dad with his plant plots and helping sort of steward the conserved land that we were living on as a family for a number of years. And so I sort of thought that if, really well into my 20s, I thought that if you were going to do something with your life that involved caring for the earth, you had to be a scientist. And I was a liberal arts person. So it took me a long time to sort of come around to the ways that I could express my love for the earth and sort of my own urgent need to do something that not only expressed that love and care, but also was trying to work toward solutions to the climate crisis and to all of the damage that's being done. And so I did my own education in comparative religion and interfaith work, and then it really wasn't until I finished graduate school that I started trying to find ways to weave those two things together. And I started really that work in New Hampshire with Steve Blackmore at Kairos Earth in Canterbury. And Steve was, yeah, just doing this beautiful work of bridging the worlds of kind of secular conservation and Christianity and finding common ground about the idea of sacred and place and how sort of deep love for the earth is the place from which to begin active care. And and that was
Mm.
really in a long meandering way what led me to writing this book and to I think just through my father and also my mother who was trained as a wildlife biologist, just growing up with a sense of the importance of
Mm.
not only our own sort of sensory experience and storytelling, but also of course, sort of the wealth of scientific knowledge that can be woven into that and what we can do when we, yeah,
Yeah,
even
that's
as an,
lovely.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that background with us. I think there's some of that I was not able to get from the book itself, so that was very helpful to know that about your parents and about how you were. I think the first question that we start off with is about the title of your book, specifically the title referring to nature's mothers and a time of unraveling. Is there something specific that unraveling refers to? I mean, that's a you know, it's a lot of unraveling going on today.
Yeah. Yeah. And to me, unraveling refers to this moment that we're in of sort of deep ecological transition and change, much of which is um, negative and harmful. And so when I think of unraveling, I'm thinking of species extinction and, kind of all the things that come
Mm.
to mind when we think of environmental or ecological crisis. And I think I use that
Mhm.
word because to me, kind of the counter to that and is this sort of deep truth that we are all deeply interwoven and interconnected with one another,
Ah,
and that other
mm,
lives impact our own and our lives impact other lives. And so when you start sort of pulling out these threads that are
mm.
woven into that pattern, we're sort of then seeing all of the
And
harm
un
that's happening as a result of that.
and unraveling, exactly. It's a very good description. Thank you. So from the start of your book, you do focus on the importance of place. And you explain what Axis Mundi, which is Latin or, or in folklore, sacred pole, but Latin for the axis of the world, for both the inspiration and another thread to the theme of motherhood. Um, can you provide any examples of how we or other listeners can create or focus on a sense of place that might help them cope with the psychological and ecological challenges of today?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that question. So I think, so much, I think everyone in this Zoom room already knows this, but I think so much of the work that is done on behalf of the earth or and however we're doing that work really comes from a place of love and deep care and deep relationship. And so part of sort of the early seeds of this book for me was an interview project I did actually with Kairos Earth years ago, where I interviewed people about sacred place, kind of on this Axis Mundi idea, this what are each of, world religions in the study of world religions, there's this idea that different religious traditions have their sort of most sacred place. But I have had fun also thinking about this idea that each of us also has our sacred places that tether us and connect us to the earth and sort of orient us and have something to say
Mm,
to us about who we are. And so to me, I think that for this interview project, I was asking people, how do you define sacred? And do you connect that sense of the sacred to a certain place? And I've never asked anyone that question who didn't immediately have a definition of sacred, whether or not they were considered themselves to be a religious or spiritual person, and who didn't also sort of immediately connect that to a memory of a place that was deeply important to them, or an encounter, or
Mm,
a home. And so to me, I think that becomes sort of the point from which the hard work of caring for those places and the places beyond those places begins, is sort of we can ground ourselves in um, that depth of relationship and love, and then we can do the hard work.
yeah. Or even acknowledging that we have those memories within us and that we can draw from those memories and that those memories have a purpose to us. Yes,
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
definitely picked right up on that. And as I actually list because I take notes when I read. I was listing some of the places. So
Yes. And if anyone has their
thank
own
you.
sacred places they'd like to put in the chat, please do. I always love to hear
Yeah,
them.
that's great. It's exciting. Thank you. So, three of the central topics you cover in your book are mothering, kinship, and interconnection. Those seem to be kind of three that are related. So, what is it to be a mother in a time of ecological collapse? And this kind of opens up the door to the time that you were, um, finding yourself pregnant and giving birth. From the introduction of your book, you invite your readers, and I'm quoting from your text, into a kind of mothering that is wild and porous, the kind that draws blood, that loves and fears, rejoices and doubts, that exposes where we are most deeply vulnerable, and from there stretches us into what is beyond us. So, what examples of experiences do you write about? I'm assuming some people haven't read your book, that highlight the sense of being most deeply vulnerable and that stretched you into what was beyond you.
Yeah, oh, thank you for that question. So, one of the threads in the book is writing about just my experience of being a mother to my own daughter, who in the book she's goes from sort of in the womb until age 3, and now she's 5. And so I just sort of write about my experience as a parent bringing a child into this world and what that means, what that asks of me. And then really the deeper thread in the book is thinking about what does it mean if we kind of widen out this word mother to think of a framework of what it means to have sort of an ecological and a spiritual orientation to our care for place and the earth. And so whether or not we have children in our lives, thinking about mothering as kind of an ecological orientation and kind of an ethical framework for giving unconditional love, deep care, uh, kind of radical inclusiveness in our understanding of what it means to be kind of fellow Earth citizens. And so throughout the book, I then look at different examples of, yeah, what that broader idea of mothering means to me. And so some of them are a little more direct, like there's a chapter on North Atlantic right whales, and I had a chance to visit some whales in their calving grounds down in Georgia and see a mother right whale with her newly born calf and sort of thinking about that. But then there are examples like salt marshes and forests, and barn owls and just
Yes,
all these
yes.
different creatures and ecosystems that kind of had something to say to me about not only how they're navigating the times we're in, but also how I can sort of learn from them and
Yeah,
how I navigate those times too.
yeah, that's awesome. It is. You actually did. That's kind of cool because that is the theme of your book, and you had so many wide range of examples because we have such a diverse planet, and your examples were very diverse. So
Oh,
that was
thank
lovely. Thank you.
you.
Um, uh, there has been a long, okay, some of these questions are from our book club members. There has long been an emphasis on stewardship when it comes to caring for the environment. How do you see stewardship as the same or different than kinship?
Oh, yeah, I love that question. And I'm grateful for it because I hadn't fully sort of thought that out explicitly myself. And so, and I'd love to hear if others have any thoughts on this, but I think for me, kinship is more of a state of being. I think whether or not, I think one of the things I came away with from writing this book is that whether or not we are fully aware of it at any given moment, we are always existing in this state of kinship with the other lives that we share our places with. And we, even from very obvious things like we breathe the oxygen that was made from the trees around where we live, and we need clean water and we need healthy soil. And in very direct ways, we are in sort of always in some type of reciprocal relationship with the living
Mm,
world around us. And that I'm sure you have all
mhm,
read Robin Wall Kimmerer, but she informed so much of my thinking about that. And then stewardship feels like kind of the active response to being in kinship, that kinship calls on us to be good stewards, to be sort of living
mm.
out that network of relationships
Yeah,
that we're part of and doing our job to nurture and care for them just as we are being nurtured and cared for.
well, that's very good. Thank you. Okay. We have a lot more questions to go through, but since we do live in the Northeast and many of us are surrounded by trees and forests, you mentioned that you are a contributor to Katie Holton's language, The Language of Trees. It seems appropriate to ask you at least one question relating to the section of your book entitled Community, Imagining Trees. Um, whoops. Ah, oh, gosh, sorry. Um, how can the research on how trees communicate and sustain one another help us to develop a biomimicry model for humans?
Oh, what a great question. Yeah, I'll just briefly explain Katie Holton's Language of Trees for those of you who have not seen that book. But it's this beautiful book. Katie Holton is an incredible artist who does all of this wonderful work of sort of translating different beings and elements of the living world into language. And so she has this tree alphabet where she sort of assigns each letter of the alphabet with a species of tree. And then she translates texts into tree. And she has this beautiful book where she's edited together all of this different writing about trees. And so there's sort of on one page is the English language version of that writing, and on the other page is her tree font, so that those words appear both in English and in tree. And it's a beautiful book that sort of pushes us to think outside of the boxes that language can sometimes put us into. And yeah, and so I think to this question of how trees communicate, I think we've all been sort of hearing so much in the past few years about all the mycelial networks and how trees are helping us understand sort of this cooperative model rather than this competitive model. And Suzanne Simard, of course, is a wonderful person to read. Her book, Mother Tree, was a great help for me when I was writing this part of the book. And yeah, I mean, I think to me, when we're thinking of biomimicry and sort of what we can learn about trees and community, it's kind of just that. It's that, yeah, all of thinking of human community and all of the ways that we can support and sustain and nurture one another. Um, I think trees are just such a beautiful example of that. I particularly loved learning in my own research about hemlock trees and how
Mm,
hemlock saplings have this like superpower that they grow incredibly, incredibly slowly in the shade of their parents. And so, if you come across like a chest high hemlock, it could be over 100 years old. And that slow growth in the shade gives them sort of the resiliency they need to turn into old trees that then have this incredibly important role as sort of keepers of their ecosystems and keeping water
yeah.
healthy, keeping soil healthy, keeping their fellow trees healthy. And so, even just this sort of ethic of slowness and of these things that I just personally need to often be reminded of slowness and stillness and patience. I think there's kind of endless things we can learn from trees, but that was one of my favorites from my
Was that
research.
the section of your book where you accepted an invitation from them? I think you said they invited you.
Oh,
Yeah. I
yes.
loved that. Again,
Yeah.
like your writing is so poetic. And
Thank you.
like that, I can remember that, like that was such a great image
Oh,
of you saying that they invited you and to love that. So, yeah,
thank you.
trees are, um, yeah, I think we underestimate uh, how important they, how they can even almost heal us, because, if you just look at them, I feel a kinship. So, but,
Absolutely. I
um,
agree.
so speaking of that, we're moving into some other common themes that run through your book relating to spirituality and myth and religion and folklore. And I love that piece about how your parents used to read to you, and that brought your imagination alive uh, when you were living in at the Audubon property in I think Massachusetts on the Cape.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, thank you. Yeah.
so I don't know if this is the right time and space to ask this. You have made some references to some of the books that influenced you in your writing of the book, but I was wondering if there was any at this time you'd like to, uh, refer to that influenced you.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things about writing this book is kind of going back all the way, back to age 10 or 11 to books that have really shaped my understanding of myself, but also of the world and my relationship to it. And so one, yes, as you mentioned, in this section on trees, I sort of write about remembering my dad reading the Lord of the Rings trilogy to us when my brother and I were young, and sort of beautifully, it was, long after both of us could read on our own, but we still did this thing where we would all sit down and he would just read out loud to us. And that I was kind of reflecting on that experience of not only the power of those stories themselves, but just the hearing them as sort of oral stories delivered from our father made them sort of particularly um, powerful, and also just helped them to sort of live in my imagination a little bit more strongly, I think. And also, so then, yeah, I write about how that kind of shaped the way I then went into the woods and had this sort of almost, not that I could articulate it then, but kind of this mythological orientation to as all children do, of looking for magic and little creatures and all of those things.
Yeah.
And then, and then fast forward to a lot of the books that I studied in school and in graduate school that I hadn't thought about in a long time kind of resurfaced for me as I was thinking about these topics. And so the Axis Mundi was one of those things from Mircea Eliade, who was a scholar we read. Um, and then there's so many writers now that have shaped kind of my own sort of eco-spiritual understanding and approach to not only writing, but the way I try to practice my own um,
Mm.
way of living that out. But so
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mentioned Robin Wall Kimmerer, and then
Mm.
Linda Hogan is a beautiful writer who has a book called Dwellings, which is one of my favorite books. And of course, Wendell Berry,
Oh,
Herman Melville
mm.
ends up in here with Moby Dick.
Wow.
A
Yeah.
lot of a lot of writers, but the literature
Yeah.
piece of writing this book was really joyful for me.
Yes. Yes. I think for a lot of us who were familiar with Robin Wall Kilmer's Braiding Sweetgrass, it kind of was, it was enriched, both either way, like I'm reading it now and I'm like, oh, this is making, so your book and her book kind of like enrich each other in a way.
Oh, I'm honored
I
to hear
think
that. Thank
so. I
you.
definitely think so. Um, so one of one of the New Hampshire Healthy Climate members asks, do you believe that religion or religiousness in the Christian sense has kept us from having a stronger connection to the earth? That's a pretty powerful question.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think, it's so interesting how, I mean, I think my answer is yes and no, and
Mhm.
sometimes it's hard to tell. And I think that's true of sort of the human condition. But to maybe answer the Christian piece more specifically, I, I grew up in sort of the very fundamentalist Christian context of Oklahoma, and I didn't have, I had sort of very narrow understanding of what Christianity was, and really my first sort of prolonged encounter with Christianity was, I'll mention again Steve Blackmer, who had this incredibly open, expansive Christian faith and practice that was both fully um, aligned with his relationship to the Bible and to his Episcopal tradition, and deeply, deeply present with the earth. And those two things were not mutually exclusive. And in the book, I interview and spend time with two friends who are Catholics living a kind of quasi-monastic life here in
Mm,
Vermont, um, sort of profoundly and utterly informed by their faith as Catholics and
mm,
fully attuned to the land on which they live. And so it's interesting because my own sort of the Christian people I know who are in my circles um, have found such strength and
mm,
inspiration and power about being good
mm,
caretakers of the earth through their traditions. And of course, I know that so much of the history has been one of separating from the earth. Of course,
mm,
like the early times of quashing out pagan cultures that were
mm,
earth-based, and full on through our modern capitalist, mm, sort of very much Christian informed way of living,
mm.
which has us very separate from the earth. And so it's complicated.
It is, yeah.
And I'd love
Hmm.
to hear, there are people who can speak to that much more
Yes, yes.
eloquently than I can, but I think sort of the power there's power and there's pitfalls in our religious traditions, but I think
Mm,
ultimately, I think if you go back far enough, all of them come somewhere from
yeah.
a very
Mm,
earth-based place, then there's that continues to live on. Yeah.
hmm. Yes, thank you. Yes, I
Mhm.
think, um, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I
Um,
see what you're saying, Rev, about
there's some good questions coming up in the
yeah.
chat, I think. Um, I would comment on that personally, but I'm not going to right now. I have another question that does relate to religion again. Are you aware if referring to a Mother Earth as a spiritual form is discouraged by any religious groups? Like, Mother Earth as a spirit. So we're talking about, the kinship, and is it discouraged that? Is there anything that, any groups that you are aware of that would discourage that?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I probably can't speak to any specific examples I know of. I know there is, the idea of, I think things can get a little sticky sometimes for people if Mother Earth is presented as a spiritual being versus maybe that's sort of more language for just sort of a broader ecological reality that maybe doesn't have as much spiritual weight. But yeah, I think again, and
Oh,
apologies that I
okay.
can't go in depth in that, but I
Well,
think,
I think in some
yeah,
ways, there are, you could open up a whole can of worms with the um, discriminatory term of mother versus father versus,
mm,
that might in itself just set some people thinking in a different way. But
for sure.
overall, I'm kind of with you. I don't really think anybody would necessarily outwardly um, discourage, but we don't know. Maybe there
Yeah,
are
I don't
people
know
out there.
either.
I don't see how they could, but uh, okay. We're going to move on to one of my favorite parts of the book, which takes place in Maine. Um, you visited the Rachel Carson Preserve on the coast of Maine and described your bonding experience with a Canadian goose. This was a turning point in the book where you talked about edge work and stated you would need to step beyond in order to learn how to exist, how to mother within transformation and change and not against it. So, do you consider this political moment we're in, when it feels like our natural environment is threatened by policy decisions being made, as an edge, as you referred to in your book?
Yeah, I'll say a little more about how I came to that. When I started writing this book, I was really naively thinking that I was going to, not that I was going to solve any big questions, but that I was going to sort of provide myself with, if nothing else, kind of an emotional roadmap to get me through these really difficult, painful questions of living in a time of ecological collapse and having a child who was going to grow up into a world that I could not know for certain one way or another was going to be okay. And um, I thought that if I just sort of looked hard enough, I would find these examples of things that would leave me fully hopeful and optimistic. And of course, I didn't. And I kept running into
Mm,
just example after example after example of, um, yeah, just sort of deep grief and
mm,
heartache and that we're unraveling these species, these ecosystems, these places that were enduring such drastic change that it was hard to see how they would come through at all or unscathed. And so as I got to this point in the book where I went to stay at Rachel Carson's cottage, I was at this moment of sort of almost, bordering on
oh,
despair and feeling like I wasn't going to come to any permanent state of hope and I was not going to find something that would let me know that my daughter was going to be okay in 20, 30, 40 years and that I actually had to do the work from within this space of uncertainty and within this space of being in this liminal state of not getting an answer. And so I
mm,
was reading at the time Rachel Carson's Sea Trilogy books, which are so beautiful, and I can't recommend them highly enough, where she spends all this time in the intertidal zone. And what so resonated with me about her work and about being in that place that she writes about is all of the life that's possible in that
mm,
space of constant change and all of the possibility that's there, and how that becomes its own place where particular forms and ways of living are possible. And so I wanted, I ended up sort of using that as my own, yeah, just kind of a lifeline for me of thinking about not getting to have any answers, but getting to a point where the practice for me became what's possible within uncertainty, what's possible in questions instead of answers, and how can we learn about that from these tidal ecosystems.
yeah, that's, it's, I think that's, you really answered the question beautifully. Um, it's hard to put into words that edge feeling, that edge work, because, like you said, you look for examples and, I'm glad that you're continuing to look for these examples.
Mm, thank
So
you.
I did
And
ask if you could elaborate on that experience staying, and you did some elaboration, but you did state, I'd love to hear you talk about the salt marshes to be the symbol of ecological motherhood. So you'll have to do a little scientific education here, which you said, but I,
um, yeah,
um,
gladly. So yeah, I came to the salt marshes as kind of a student of Rachel Carson, wanting to. I sort of had my entry point through her writing and her research, and I was living in Maine, in coastal Maine at the time, and so there were salt marshes all over, and I got to go spend some time out with salt marsh biologists who were measuring edge erosion and how quickly things were um, sort of washing out to sea. And um, in so many places, I also went to southern Louisiana, where it's a completely different story there, where the salt marshes are sort of just being gulped into the sea at this incredible, terrible rate. And in Maine, it's a little bit slower, but I think salt marshes really spoke to me because they are at once an incredibly resilient and adaptive ecosystem. They have all of these tools where they can, um, you know, grow higher ground with sediment accretion, and they can sort of creep inward and sort of protect themselves that way. And they're also, of course, incredibly vulnerable to sea level rise. And so to me, that was just another way that they reflected back to us this moment that we're in of, yeah, at once resilient and adaptable and incredibly vulnerable to what's happening. And I ended up sort of becoming fascinated with these little single-celled organisms that live in salt marshes, and they actually live in all marine environments, but there's a particular set of species that live in salt marsh in this
What
intertidal
are they
zone.
called?
They're called foraminifera, and they are,
That's, I was looking for
um,
it.
and those just little tiny creatures have such, I won't go into too much just
Yeah,
for the sake of time,
okay.
but they have this incredible sort of storytelling power where the fossils of them have informed 500 million years of our understanding of sea level rise over that span of history of our Earth. And so um,
I just
we
feel
found
that if
just
more people understood this story, they would be a little bit more careful about how they treat our seacoast.
yeah, that's certainly part of the hope. And but I just had a lot of, I felt buoyed by these little single-celled organisms that kind of spoke to me about how our own lives can feel so small and so tiny, but that they still have this hugely important role to play in this broader story of our oceans. And so thinking about, yeah, what we can learn from even the tiniest creatures about how to be right now. And
That's great. Yes,
yeah.
yes. Thank you for going that far with it because that was something that I couldn't remember, but I remembered the my reaction when I was reading it, and I was fascinated right along with you. So that's great. All right, so we're coming to the conclusion. Well, we have a few minutes to talk about the conclusion, which in which you talk about some of the themes of grief, hope, and love. And we would, as an organization that is concerned about how climate change is affecting people's health, like to ask you if you can, what benefits to our health can you think of that would come from creating this relationship of kinship and connection to our environment?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, again, of course, we all know that there are completely direct um, ways that caring for our planet means caring for our own bodies. And I know I don't need to go into that of, clean water and all the issues we're dealing with right now, PFAS in our soils, all of these things that impact our own bodily health as they are also impacting our earth. But I think speaking to maybe a more emotional, psychological, even just broadly spiritual health and well-being, um, there's so much, I love that science is kind of catching up to the ways that that is true. I got to participate in a forest bathing program for the first time this last year, and just getting to hear about all of the ways that sort of demonstrably forest therapy, which is really just being quiet in the woods and using your senses to feel immersed in that space in various ways, lowers depression, boosts your immune system, decreases anxiety. I mean, it just has like you can keep going
Mm,
with these things that they've actually studied and know to be true. Um, and I think we can all feel that when um,
yeah.
when we are outdoors, we sense those things. And that another thing that I just loved about writing this book was deepening my own awareness about just our sort of fundamental beings, our five senses that we learn about as toddlers and kindergartners are like our best tools for tuning into that and are available
Mm,
to us all the time. And
mm,
even just little practices, like I try to step outside for even just 2 minutes every morning and just listen and just look and just smell.
mm,
And it changes how I go about the rest of my day. And so I think it's really powerful that we don't need to go beyond our own beings to sort of be grounded in that relationship and to start to find the benefits of it. And, you can go deeper and deeper from there. But
hmm.
that was a really hopeful
Yes.
thing for me.
Yeah. It's a very simple thing that we can do every day if we're just a little bit intentional about it and, like, oh wow, I can just take a couple of minutes and be aware that that's what you're doing and connecting. That's lovely. Thank you. Um, Do you have any suggestions for mothers and family members about how to balance both grief and hope? At the conclusion of your book, you say that hope is difficult for you and that you have settled on love.
Mm.
Um, how is love more effective than hope? There's a lot of questions here. What are the differences between them, and can love produce a better outcome?
Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to get the chance to speak to that a little bit because I think that was the most emotionally kind of challenging and complicated place for me in writing this book was that I sort of kept, as I was beginning the book and starting to speak to people, and I sort of kept saying to everyone I talked to about the book, I kept saying, well, I brought a child into this world, so I have to have hope for the future. And it was one of those things where I was saying it so much that I was starting to wonder if I really meant it. And because I was really struggling to, and I want to be clear that it's not that I'm hopeless. I do have hope, and I think hope is vitally important. But I think what I was finding was that my hope was sort of it was like on this roller coaster where I would feel hopeful, and then I would read about another right whale entangled and washed up on shore, and it would go down again. I remember reading all of these headlines the summer that I was finishing the draft that were saying things like hottest summer in 100,000 years, global boiling, all of, get the coral out of the ocean, and just feeling, I think what I came to is that my hope was not consistent and my hope was not deepening and growing. But what was, even when I was in the deepest moments of grief in this book, I was also deepening my sense of love. Love for my daughter, love for the places I've lived, love for the species I was learning about. And somehow I came to this place where I could be in the depth of grief and struggle to find hope, but I never struggled in that place to find love. And so I think it ended up, what I came away with was a feeling that love felt like a reliable foundation. Um, Love felt like the place from which my hope could
Mm,
grow when it was given what it needed. And love was sort of what kept me out of despair and out of apathy
mm,
and wanting to keep doing the work even when it was so painful. And so, yeah, I think in terms of suggestions for mothers or families or really anyone about balancing that,
mhm.
I think for me, just always remembering that right on the other side of grief is love. And sometimes those are
Yes. Oh,
distinguishable.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We can remember that. Um, I think it can pull us through some pretty tough realities.
Yeah.
I do agree. That's lovely. Thank you. Because
Mm.
I think it is, we need a remedy for that, and I appreciate the fact that you would be brave enough and courageous enough to call it out as love, because it's not always easy. So, I think it's really important. So, thank you so much. And we are coming to the end, and we have 15 minutes left. So, I will ask you if you're right still, what's in ahead for you in the future. Are you going to write another book, or are you going to write for another publication? What can you tell us about what you're up to now?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so I have just started work on a second book and it's yeah, I guess I haven't said anything publicly about it yet, but I'm happy to talk about it a bit. It will be it's actually sort of growing out of these little single-celled organisms that I learned about in writing this book, got me really interested in other very small things. And so this book will be about looking through my microscope and thinking about, as we look at sort of the very, very small scale, what we can learn about place and belonging
Oh,
and sort of, um, and a little bit about what it means to be uh, just deeply grounded in our places in our communities right now. Um,
Nice. So you
yeah.
are going to go into science a little bit
Yes,
here.
I'll go back into science.
Yeah, I think the two are very closely related. It has something to do with our powers of observation,
Mm.
which I think you conveyed extremely well in your book. And I just want to thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you so
And it
much.
kind of concludes our the questions that we had pulled together. And we wish you the best in your writing endeavors. And I want to thank everybody that's in attendance. And then, Emily, if you've been monitoring the chat, I will hand it over to Emily to see if there are any questions in the chat that you might want to add on to the interview from
Yeah,
our audience.
we didn't get any questions. Reb just kind of answered the prompts of Chelsea to talk about places that were sacred to them. And but Reb, if you wanted to, or anyone else wants to come off mute and ask questions or share, I know Chelsea was interested in hearing from folks. So we have a few minutes to do that if anyone's interested.
Loving this book.
Thank you.
This is a Robin Wall Kimmerer moment for me with finding you as a new wonderful connection to the interconnectedness of us with our other than human beings on this planet. So thank you so much. One of the groups I've begun hanging with are place-based environmental educators.
Oh,
And I'm just finding so much fun with that orientation to looking at where we are and our relationship to that. And your writing has just made that come alive. So I just want to really uh, let that stand out as one of the wonderful pieces of this book. And I came to this group um, by accident. I didn't take, it sounds like you had a book group on this book. Okay, well, somehow I missed that. And I have only read up to chapter 11 now. I just got the book a few days ago and get little snips of it in between my busy schedule. But um, uh, one of the things I was curious about, I know Steve Blackmer, and I just wondered, how did you find Steve?
Oh my gosh, I love telling the story of how I found Steve. And thank you so much for all you've said. That really means a lot to me. So I found Steve through, this is like what taught me not to believe in coincidences. So I had, I'll try to make it short, but I was sort of taking a turn from what I had thought I would do after graduate school and feeling really lost. And I was really wanting to suddenly sort of blend my interfaith background with ecology and some type of earth-based work. And I did not know how to do that or if anyone was doing that. And I went to a Purim Spiel, which is a Jewish holiday at my aunt and uncle's house in Concord. And my uncle, Steve, said, "Oh, I need to introduce you to my neighbor, Steve, because he knows this person named Steve Blackmer, who just started this nonprofit and they're looking for help." And so I always say it's like the confluence of the three Steves, and I found Steve Blackmer, and I became, yeah, I got to be the first employee of Kairos Earth, and it really, like, truly changed my life. Yeah. So. Yeah, Steve's wonderful.
Right.
That's
Mm.
great. Another question I had was, um, do you know, well, I'm sure you know, the author of Church of the Wild.
Yes, yeah, Victoria Lures. Yeah, she's doing incredible work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this reminded me of that book.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, her work is incredible. Yeah, thank you. She's lovely.
got a lot of additional book recommendations out of this evening, I think. And thank you, Chelsea, so much for giving us an exclusive on your next book.
Oh, yes, gladly.
Um, any other questions from the group before we wrap up? Sarah?
Sorry, had a little trouble unmuting there. I just want to thank you, and sort of as you were talking and also as I was reading the book, I'm just like things are kind of coming into focus and I'm getting inspired and getting ideas. Part of what's interesting to me is to teach other people how important the environment is and to get other people inspired to take action. And just as we were talking tonight, or you were talking and we were listening, the comments about place and how that is something that's so universal, and I'm just thinking, what a cool way to get people to take it personally, to see that this matters, to see that they are connected. That was just one of the many ideas popping into my head as I was listening, and I really want to thank you. It's really wonderful to get to meet you and to hear more about your thinking and the ideas. It's very inspiring. So,
Thank you so much, Sarah. And yeah, I think some of these writers we've talked about tonight do such a good job of that, and have taught me about when we come at it from that place perspective, we kind of skirt all of the politicized, it obviously should not be politicized, but um, people who might be on the other side of climate change or something are everyone still has a powerful story about connection to place and land and can talk about that easily, or they know that summers are getting hotter or that things are flooding, all of those felt sort of both emotional and just lived experiences, I think, can kind of create that common ground and shared experience of change and loss, that can help have some of those hard conversations. Yeah.
One of the things you mentioned tonight was, I've just started talking with folks that I work with as a mental health professional about their place and how they're connected to it, and the healing power of that when they've found that connection in a really satisfying and personal way. So this book is going to be a recommendation that I have for cultivating that kind of awareness. As I explore this path with clients, I find that there's in some of the work that I'm doing, I'm finding that that's not really a thought in some people's awareness, that the world around them in a connected way is something that is healing. And so I think I'm looking forward to doing more and more of this in my work with folks. So thank you so much.
Oh, yeah, I appreciate that so much. I think that's so true. I had kind of my own awareness about that as it was actually after I'd finished writing the book and I was back at this piece of conserved land where my family had lived for the first time in years, and I had really sort of grieved leaving that. We had to leave that place when my father retired, and um, but when I was living there as a little 11-year-old, our family was going through a hard time, and I was remembering just being in that place that like came back to me that that whole year I had been so anxious around other people and scared and sad, and but I remembered that when I was just outside, that was like the place I felt safe and held, and um so it was just interesting to come back as an adult and sort of have that reliving of that emotional experience at that place as kind of the one thing that made me feel completely okay, you know. So I think that's so true. So thank you. Yeah.
All right. Well, it's getting near to 7. I want to thank you, Chelsea, so much for your writing and for joining us tonight. I want to thank Beverly for leading this conversation and everyone else who was able to join in. For folks listening, if you'd like to join New Hampshire Healthy Climate, New Hampshire healthyclimate.org/join-us. Joining us could look like getting on our book club list, which it sounds like Reb might want to be added to that list so she doesn't miss the next book, or participating in policy work, children's health education, behavioral health work. And Chelsea, this was I think you found a friendly audience with us. Your book about being in touch with yourself, being in touch with place is such a huge part of what we do when talking about the relationship between human health and environmental health. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you, Beverly. Thank you,
Thank
Emily.
you.
Thank
Yes.
you, all of you, for being here. And thank you for just the wonderful work you do with New Hampshire Healthy Climate, which is such vital work.
Thank you.
Look forward to your next book.
Thanks.